The values at the heart of Unitarian Universalism call us to reflect on the ways that white supremacy culture has shaped our history and our lives. We recognize that CVUUS gathers on land seized from the Western Abenaki people by European colonizers. The Abenaki are still here, still hunting, fishing, foraging, weaving, dancing, praying, working, speaking, surviving, and thriving. As we gather here, we pay homage to them, their ancestors, and to future generations by committing ourselves to building a more inclusive, just, and respectful space for all. Good morning. Are you noticing that there's sunlight streaming through our windows? Wow, let's just notice that. Welcome to this Sunday service at the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. CVUUS exists to spiritually nourish, challenge, and sustain people of all ages and circumstances so that they might lead lives of meaning, integrity, and service. Wherever you are, whatever your beliefs, your origins, your way of being, you are welcome here. If you are new to our community, we encourage you to sign the guest book in the foyer so that we might get to know you better and offer opportunities for engagement with us through our weekly email news update, The Blast. My name is Abby Sessions, and today I am honored to serve as worship associate for my dear friend of nearly 50 years, Rich Wolfson, as we explore together the radical roots of our faith. Once or twice a month, our worship is led by a guest, often a member of our congregation, as Rich is. Actually, Rich is one of the founding members of this congregation. We hope you will come often to experience the variety of ways that we worship together on Sundays. Others whom we appreciate for helping to make our Sunday worship happen today include our tech team, Carl Lindholm on camera, Richard Hopkins, Mary Hadley, and Liam Batches Greenwood for his artistic slides. Zoom host Steve Butterfield, our greeters Brett Millier and Helene Vanderberg, Marnie Wood and Ravel Allen for seasonal decorations, Dana Roark, Gail Munchow, Pat Schmitter, and Hannah Sessions for social hour treats, and others who stepped up to help today. As you might notice, there are many opportunities to help Sunday worship services happen. At CVUUS, we find many ways to connect with one another outside of Sunday worship. Many examples of these pathways for connection are listed in your order of service and on the slides. I counted 10 this week. But I'd like to highlight 2 events happening this week. On Thursday, Tom Morgan, back there, will lead a conversation about the homeless in our community. I should say about those experiencing homelessness in our community, in the fellowship hall at 7 p.m. On Saturday, our congregation member Stephen Fiddler will be launching his book titled The Two Paths, Finding the World Beyond Belief. This will take place at Ilsley Library at 12:30 p.m. on Saturday. A great day for Stephen Fiddler. And next Sunday, please plan to join us after worship for a congregational conversation on shared ministry with Reverend Tricia Hart, right here in the sanctuary. If shared ministry does not mean the fact that we have 2 ministers sharing the job, then what does it mean? Come to find out more. And our annual Radical Love giveaway is gearing up. Dorothy Mammon and Ellen Flight have a few words to say about it.
We dedicate our announcement to those of you who think you have nothing to share in the Radical Love giveaway. We have ideas for you.
Ellen, I'm seeing in today's order of service this brochure, and the deadline is coming up, and I've just been spinning. I don't know what I can donate.
Well, I do know that you're very proud of your electric car. Is there
Oh.
something you could do with that?
Well, I do love driving that car, and I love driving it for dial-a-ride for Tri-Valley Transit.
You know, I'm going on a trip in a little while, and I could use a ride to the airport.
Ride to the airport.
Yeah,
Ooh.
you could maybe do that. I was also kind of trying to think of what I could do, maybe something different that I've done in the past.
Yeah, I know you've done some crafty things in the past.
Yeah,
I
I might
think-
still offer the Valentine's making party.
Oh, that's pretty fun. That's very fun.
Yeah.
What else do you like to do? You like to read?
I do like to read.
Anything
Oh,
book-oriented?
maybe I could like pick 5 of my favorite books and meet with somebody for tea, and we could talk about their 5 favorite books and my 5 favorite books. And then we would connect, which is a whole part of the Radical Love Fest, so that we all get to know each other better. Anything else you think you could do?
Well, I like to play dominoes.
Oh, I like to play dominoes. We could offer a domino playing event.
I like to sew.
You could make something.
No,
Or you
I
could
have
teach
too
somebody
many
how to
ideas.
sew. I was also thinking, my mother can't really address envelopes anymore, but she would like to send cards. Somebody could address envelopes or do some writing for somebody who, whose fingers are a little more arthritic than others or whatever.
Wow.
So you could have a whole lot of just regular things you know how to do that you could share in a creative way.
Well, now I have so many ideas, I don't know what to choose.
Yeah, okay. Well, if any of you would like to have a conversation with us about taking what you enjoy and turning it into a Radical Love offering, we would be happy to discuss that with you.
And I would just like to point out that you don't have to limit yourself to one item. Think big for the Radical Love giveaway.
Thank you, Ellen and Dorothy and Abby. I should mention that Abby is also a founding member of this congregation, and she has a wonderful story I think she'd share with you if you asked her about that. Our gathering song is number 187. It sounds along the ages. To me, it's a celebration of many roots of our Unitarian Universalist tradition and shows respect for all religious traditions and the religious leaders who have had the courage to express dissenting views, which is a theme of this service. It's also a reminder that we're all looking in our own ways for the same basic truths. And I believe Ronnie has a word about how we're going to sing this.
Hi, everybody. We haven't sung this one in a while, or possibly ever, some of you, so we'll have the choir sing the first verse for you, and then we'll go back and repeat the first verse again and just sing through it. So I invite you to just listen to the first verse, the choir will sing, and then hop in and sing the whole thing. Here we go.
Today's call to worship is from the opening paragraph of Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay Nature, which I've taken the liberty of degenderizing. I also note the phrase original relation to the universe, which to me is basically the definition of religion. My religion is how I forge my relationship to the universe, to the people, the other life forms on this planet, and all the rest of the universe. So here's Emerson. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. Why should not we enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should we not have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs? The sun shines also today. There are new lands, new people, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and law and worship.
Now please join me in the chalice lighting, the words of which are on your screen. As we light this chalice, its flame symbolizes the warmth of friendship, a friendship that extends back to our UU forebears. The light of truth, a truth revealed not by priests and scripture, but to each and every one of us individually. The fire of commitment to act on the basis of our own beliefs in what is right. And if the children would like to come forward or sit in the front row or sit on the steps, come on up. Great. I am going to read one of my all-time favorite books called The Big Orange Spot. There are no slides, and I'm not even going to show you the pictures. I'm going to invite you to make the pictures in your mind until the very end. Then I'm going to show you some pictures. All right? I'm going to try this. Mr. Plumbean lived on a street where all the houses were the same. Can you picture that in your mind? He liked it that way. So did everybody else on Mr. Plumbean's street. This is a neat street, they would say. Then one day, a seagull flew over Mr. Plumbean's house. You got that in your mind? You got a picture of that? The seagull was carrying a can of orange paint. Nobody knows why. And the seagull dropped the bucket of orange paint on Mr. Plumbean's house. It made a big orange splot on his roof. Can you picture that? "Ooh, too bad," everybody said. "Mr. Plumbean will have to paint his house again." "I suppose I will," said Mr. Plumbean. But he didn't paint his house right away. He looked at the big orange spot for a long time. The neighbors got tired of seeing that big orange spot. Someone said, "Mr. Plumbean, we wish you'd get around to painting your house." Can you picture that person, that neighbor? Okay, Mr. Plumbean said, I will. He got some blue paint and some white paint, and that night he got busy. When the paint was gone, the roof was blue, the walls were white, and the big orange blot was still there. When that paint was, then he got some more paint. He got red paint, yellow paint, green paint, and even purple paint. In the morning, the other people on the street came out of their houses. Their houses were still all the same. But Mr. Plumbean's house was like a rainbow. It was like a jungle. It was like an explosion. There was a big orange blot. And there were little orange blots. There were stripes. There were pictures of elephants and lions and steam shovels. Can you picture that? You got that picture in your mind? The people said, Plumbean has popped his cork, flipped his wig. That day, Mr. Plumbean bought carpenter's tools, and he built a tower on top of his house, and he painted a clock on the tower. The next day, the people said, Plumbean has gushed his mush, lost his marbles. They decided they would just pretend not to notice. That very night, Mr. Plumbean got a truck full of green things. He planted palm trees, baobabs. Anybody know what baobabs is? It's a very unusual kind of tree. Thorn bushes, onions, and frangipani. I don't even know what frangipani is, but I love the word. In the morning, he bought a hammock and an alligator. When the other people came out of their houses, they saw Mr. Plumbean swinging in a hammock between two palm trees. They saw an alligator lying in the grass. Mr. Plumbean was drinking lemonade. You got that? Can you picture that? Can you picture all that frangipani in his front yard? Whatever frangipani is. Let's see. I missed a page. Plumbean has gone too far. This used to be a neat street. Plumbean, what have you done to your house? The people shouted. Mr. Plumbean said, my house is me, and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams. The people went away. They asked the person who lived next door to Mr. Plumbean to go and have a talk with him. Tell him we all liked it here before he changed his house. Tell him that his house has to be the same as ours, so we can have our neat street. The woman next door went to see Mr. Plumbean that evening. They sat under the palm trees, drinking lemonade and talking all night long. Early the next morning, she went out to get lumber and rope and nails and paint. When the people came out of their houses, they saw a red and yellow ship next door to Mr. Plumbean's house. Can you picture that? Have you got that picture in your mind? What have you done to your house? They shouted at the person. My house is me, and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams, said the woman, who had always loved ships. She's just like Plumbean, the people said. She's got bees in her bonnet and bats in her belfry. Then, one by one, the neighbors went to see Mr. Plumbean late at night. They wanted their neat street back. They would sit under the palm trees and drink lemonade and talk about their dreams. And whenever anybody visited Mr. Plumbean's house, the very next day, that person would set about changing her own house or his own house to fit his or her dreams. Now I'm going to show you some pictures. One was a hot air balloon. One was the Taj Mahal. One was a medieval castle made of tiny stones. And one was the Parthenon. I think that's the Parthenon. Whenever a stranger came to the street of Mr. Plumbeen and his neighbors, the stranger would say, "This is not a neat street." Then all the people would say, "Our street is us, and we are it. Our street is where we like to be, and it looks like all our dreams." The end. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Abby, for reading one of my favorite children's stories, and one that I think has an awful lot to say about UUism. I would say this church is not a neat congregation in exactly the sense, and that's what we're celebrating today. Usually at this point we sing the kids out, but instead we're going to speak them out. We're going to speak them with a responsive reading from the 19th century Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing, who lived from 1780 to 1842, to remind us that our religious exploration program too grows out of our radical UU roots. So you can either read the responsive reading 652 in the gray hymnal as the kids go out, or you can read it on the screen. The title is The Great End in Religious Instruction. I will read the regular type, and you can read the italic type, and if you could stand and begin reading, and the kids can begin to go out as we read. The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own. Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth. Not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward strengths. Not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or peculiar notions. But to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subjects may be offered to their decision. Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought. Not to impose religion upon them in the form of arbitrary rules, but to awaken the conscience of moral discernment. In a word, the great end is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life.
At CVUUS, we share our weekly offering with local, national, or worldwide organizations which represent our values in the world. This month, we are sharing the plate with Acorn Food Hub. Acorn stands for Addison County Relocalization Network. It's a local nonprofit working to increase access to nutritious local food, in part by making it easier for wholesale buyers, restaurants, retail stores, colleges, universities, local schools, and hospitals to purchase from our local farms. Please be as generous as you are able. received 3 yellow cards. The first is from Pam Bernmau, in case anybody missed the announcement. CVUUS member Stephen Fiddler published his first book. It is an inspiring story about his journey from despair to hope after unexpectedly losing his sight as a young man. The book is funny and thought-provoking. His book launch party is next Saturday, October 21st at Ilse Library from 12:30 to 2:30. See the flyer on the bulletin board in the foyer for details. Thank you for pointing all that out, Pam, all that detail. From Priscilla Bremser, I write to honor the life of my longtime colleague, Victor Nuovo. It's impossible to do justice to his long life of service in this yellow card box. Suffice it to say that he will be missed. And there's a wonderful tribute in the latest Addison Independent. From Ann Webster, a wonderful radical love gathering at Margie and Jordan's Young's last night. Delicious food, great company, and conversation. Loved being with Dee, Martha, Avi, Stephen, Margie, Jordan, and Xander. This seems like either getting a jump on this year or something that was left over from last year. A radical love goes on and on, year-round. Great, thank you all for that. In a week of living, there are milestones and passages, large and small, joys and concerns. Let's have a moment of contemplation to get in touch with what's on your mind and heart this morning.
We'll now have the choir anthem. The choir anthem is actually a hymn from our hymnal. It's As Tranquil Streams That Meet and Merge, and we chose this because it's a celebration of the freedom of our church with the wonderful phrase, free from the bonds that bind the mind to narrow thought and lifeless creed, written by Reverend Marion Franklin Ham. Ronnie will lead the choir in this anthem. Thank you, choir and Ronnie. In place of a sermon or reflection, we have reflection and readings based on our radical UU roots. We're going to have 3 parts separated by a very brief musical interlude. I will read, reflect, and Abby will quote from many UU historical sources. Many Unitarian Universalists, many of you included probably, have had the experience of discovering Unitarian Universalism and finding for the first time a true religious home. Because ours is such an individual religion, understanding our modern UU principles and appreciating our services and other activities seems enough. One can embrace Unitarian Universalism knowing nothing of its past. You can even embrace CVUUS as your religious home, knowing nothing of the broader UU denomination. Yet Unitarian Universalism has a rich history, with visionary and courageous individuals breaking radically with tradition, sometimes at the risk of their lives. So today's service is a celebration of our radical UU roots and just a few of many glimpses of individuals who planted those roots. We UUs can trace our roots far back to many who were not themselves UUs, but whose views were the seeds of ideas we cherish today. For example, the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten was, over 3,000 years ago, an early monotheist. He captured something inherent in a humorous description of modern UUs, that we believe in at most one God. But it was in the 1500s in Europe that Unitarian ideas first surfaced clearly as a reaction against Trinitarianism in Christianity. Both Catherine Vogel, which is a very poor transliteration of her Polish name, which you can see on the painting of her being burned at the stake up on the screen, both Catherine Vogel and the Spaniard Michael Servetus were burned as heretics for espousing Unitarian beliefs. Incidentally, Servetus was also a doctor and one of the first to document the circulation of the human blood. But here he is being a Unitarian. He's railing against the Trinity.
But in reality, 3 beings, 3 gods, are foisted upon us under the pretense and with the names of a unity. How much this tradition of the Trinity has, alas, been a laughingstock to the Muslims, the Jews, who shrink from giving adherence to this fancy of ours and laugh at our foolishness about the Trinity. Even the very beasts of the field would make fun of us did they grasp our fantastical notion. For all the works of the Lord bless the one God.
Servetus left his native Spain, went to France and elsewhere in Europe, and he escaped conviction by the Spanish and French Inquisitions. But he was eventually captured in Geneva, where he was tried for heresy, and with the sanction of Calvin himself, was burned at the stake in 1553. In passing sentence, the court cited his heinous crimes.
He printed secretly a book full of the said heresies and horrible, execrable blasphemies against the Holy Trinity. He persists maliciously in his detestable errors. We judge that you, Servetus, have for a long time promulgated false and thoroughly heretical doctrine, a thing horrible, shocking, scandalous, and infectious. For these and other reasons, desiring to purge the Church of God of such infection and cut off the rotten member, we condemn you to be burned with your book to ashes.
And there is his book on the errors of the Trinity, and there's Michael Servetus. So Servetus perished as a heretic, lacking the religious freedom that we take for granted. But what really is a heretic? The Greek word means able to choose. Able, if you will, to form what Emerson called an original relation to the universe. The Western world's first legalization of that free religious choice was made by the only Unitarian king in history, John Sigismund of Transylvania, where Unitarianism thrived in the 1500s. Here's Sigismund's 1568 Act of Religious Tolerance.
Preachers shall be allowed to preach the gospel everywhere, each according to his own understanding of it. If the community wish to accept such preaching, well and good. If not, they shall not be compelled, but shall be allowed to keep the preachers they prefer.
By the time of Sigismund's death in 1571, at the young age of 31, some 500 Unitarian congregations thrived in Transylvania. Unfortunately, their freedom was abruptly curtailed, and Calvinist persecution of Unitarians began immediately after Sigismund's death. But Unitarianism ultimately survived, and today Transylvania, mostly areas of Romania and Hungary, has more Unitarians and UUs than anywhere else outside the United States. Moving forward 2 centuries, I should also add some UU churches in America are partnered with Transylvanian Unitarian churches. Moving forward 2 centuries, recall again that these are only select glimpses of UU history, we find the English cleric Joseph Priestley actively promoting Unitarianism. Better known in my profession, I'm a physicist, as the scientist who discovered oxygen and the inverse square behavior of the electric force, Priestley himself regarded the ministry as his first calling. Priestley's religious liberalism probably benefited from an education like that described in our earlier responsive reading. Here's Priestley on his school experience at a so-called dissenting academy that he chose instead of the Calvinist academy his relatives promoted.
They indulged us in the greatest freedoms. We were permitted to ask whatever questions and to make whatever remarks we pleased. And we did it with the greatest, but without any offensive, freedom. The general plan of our studies was exceedingly favorable to free inquiry.
As a Unitarian minister, Priestley, like many Unitarians, was dismayed at the deification of Jesus.
There was introduced into the Christian church the idolatrous worship of Jesus Christ, then that of the Virgin Mary, and lastly, that of immutable other saints. And this modern Christian idolatry has been attended with all the absurdities of the ancient heathen.
Priestley was optimistic about the prospects for Unitarianism in England. Here in 1785, he introduces a particularly incendiary metaphor.
Let us not, therefore, be discouraged, though for the present we should see no great number of churches professedly Unitarian. We are, as it were, laying gunpowder under the old building of error and superstition, which a single spark may hereafter inflame, so that the work of many ages may be overturned in a moment.
But Priestley and Unitarianism did not prevail in England. In 1791, a Church of England-inspired mob destroyed his home and laboratory and sacked all the Unitarian chapels in Birmingham, England. 3 years later, Priestley left for America, where he promptly founded 2 early Unitarian churches in Pennsylvania. Before we move to our second part, in America, a brief musical interlude excerpted from our UU hymn, The Fire of Commitment. Our second part concerns Unitarian Universalism in America. Joseph Priestley was no stranger to Americans. His friend Benjamin Franklin had attended Priestley's Unitarian services in England. And our third president, Thomas Jefferson, claimed to base his own Unitarian faith on Priestley's book. More than 200 years after King Sigismund's act of religious tolerance in Transylvania, Jefferson's Virginia statute for religious freedom became the model for the Declaration of Religious Freedom under which we at CVUUS worship today, from our Constitution's Bill of Rights.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
In the early 1800s, Unitarian and Universalist ideas thrived in America, especially in New England. Vigorous debates between Unitarians and Trinitarians resulted in many then congregational churches becoming Unitarian. That's when the church at the head of Church Street in Burlington went Unitarian. At least one Episcopal church also became Unitarian. That's King's Chapel in Boston. And if you drive through Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire, as Artley and I did last weekend, you will see churches that say, First Parish, Trinitarian. We even saw one church that was combined. It said, I forget what the name was, but it said UUA and UCC. So there is this theme that plays out particularly in southern New England of this separation from Trinitarians and Unitarians. Among the prominent Unitarian ministers of the 1800s was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote today's opening words. In 1838, Emerson was invited to deliver the commencement address at Harvard Divinity School. In a scathing example of Unitarian radicalism, Emerson vented his frustration with the state of contemporary Christianity, and at the same time showed seeds of the nature-oriented Unitarianism that many of us embrace today.
Jesus Christ belonged to the true race of prophets. But what a distortion did his memory suffer in the following ages. He spoke of miracles, for he felt that life is a miracle. But the word miracle, as pronounced by Christian churches, gives a false impression. It is a monster. It is not one with the blowing clover and the falling rain. Historic Christianity dwells with noxious exaggeration about the person of Jesus. But the soul knows no persons. It invites everyone to expand to the full circle of the universe and will have no preference but those of spontaneous love.
Although Unitarianism at that time was firmly grounded in Christianity, Emerson's words hint at a religious spirit broader than Christianity. Emerson and his young friend Henry David Thoreau were avid students in particular of Eastern religion, helped by the Unitarian transcendentalist Elizabeth Palmer Peabody's translations of Buddhist writings into English. Emerson, Thoreau, and Peabody and other transcendentalists made Unitarian more receptive to non-Unitarian ideas, and I would say moved us in the direction we've come today, to be a very opening, welcoming of all traditions in our religion. But what about the second UU in UU? 19th century Universalism grew alongside, but separate from, Unitarianism, emphasizing belief in universal salvation. Where Unitarianism was more a religion of urban intellectuals, Universalism thrived in rural areas. Here in Addison County, there were Universalist congregations in New Haven, East Middlebury, and Shoreham, and buildings of the latter two survive today, and there they are. I don't have time to do justice to the radical history of Universalism, but will sum up its essence in the words of the late UU minister Jack Mendelsohn, who lived from 1918 to 2012.
There is one terror I would banish from every heart, the fear of hell. In the early years of my ministry, I was asked by a couple who were strangers if I would conduct a funeral service for a family member. I listened, shaken, as they described their last experience with death, the death of a baby born to close relatives. The officiating minister felt compelled by his doctrinal belief to announce that the infant was burning in hell because she had died unbaptized. With all due respect for that minister's belief, that is the opposite of all that I hold to be religious.
Clearly, it's to our Universalist heritage that we UUs owe our freedom from the Christian notion of original sin. On May 12th, 1961, the two streams of Unitarianism and Universalism finally merged into one, Unitarian Universalism. I've spent much of this service emphasizing the radical roots of Unitarian Universalism, roots that are downright heretical in the eyes of mainline Christianity. But our religion wouldn't be worth much if it consisted primarily of railing against the Trinity and defining ourselves by what we're not. In fact, UUs act on their religious beliefs. So do practitioners of other religions, and many do great good in the world, even though they may be motivated by doctrines that we UUs don't share. But I believe there's a special motivation that comes from one's relation to the universe, and I think that's part of the reason UUs have been at the forefront of social justice, peace, environmental, and other movements that seek to improve the lot of humankind and our planet. And before we move on, Ronnie will again give us a brief musical interlude. Of the many manifestations of the fire of Unitarian Universalist commitment, I've chosen just two, gender equality and racial justice, as examples of UU activism that goes back to a time when these ideas were truly radical. The drive for gender equality, especially among UUs, predates modern feminism by centuries. Here's the outspoken Universalist Judith Sargent Murray of Massachusetts, writing in the year 1790.
Yes, ye lordly, ye haughty sex, our souls are by nature equal to yours. The same breath of God animates, enlivens, and invigorates us. And that we are not fallen lower than yourselves, let those witness who have greatly towered above the various discouragements by which they have been so heavily oppressed.
Gender equality in religious leadership came later when, in 1863, Olympia Brown became the first woman in America ordained by a religious denomination, namely the Universalists. Here's Brown on old dogmas.
When I read of the vain discussions of the present day about the virgin birth and other old dogmas which belong to the past, I feel how great the need is still of a real interest in the religion which builds up character, teaches love, and opens up to the seeker such a world of usefulness and the beauty of holiness.
Brown combined her successful Universalist ministry with active involvement in women's rights. Here she is responding to a Massachusetts legislator arguing against gender equality.
He said that nature is against equal rights. He says that it will take the romance out of life to grant women equal rights. Can you imagine such a thing? No one worthy of the name of man or woman is willing to surrender liberty and become subservient to another. We will push on, keeping in view the rights of our common nature until woman is the peer of man in every sphere of life.
Olympia Brown was a friend and collaborator of another Unitarian activist for women's rights, Susan B. Anthony, on the coin up there. Anthony's fire of commitment clearly merged her religion and her life's work.
I pray every single second of my life, not on my knees, but with my work. My prayer is to lift women to equality with men. Work and worship are one with me. I know there is no God made happy by my getting down on my knees and calling him great.
And in a reflection on religious art that harks back to Priestley's revulsion at what he called Christian idolatry,
one gets awfully sick of the ghastly spectacle of the dead Christ. It is amazing how little they make of the living Christ.
Many Unitarians and Universalists, including Susan B. Anthony, were active in the abolitionist movement and later in the more general drive for racial equality. In fact, her Quaker meetings' lack of sympathy with the abolitionists is part of what drove Anthony to become a Unitarian. The topic of UUs and racial justice could occupy many UU services, but I'll end with a 20th century example of the UU fire of commitment, that of the UU minister James Reeb, who was beaten to death by racist thugs during Martin Luther King's Montgomery to Selma March in 1965, an event in which an estimated half of all Unitarian Universalist ministers in the U.S. participated. Reeb, who was 38 when he had died, had left the Presbyterian ministry and embraced Unitarianism a year after completing divinity school. All my readings so far have been from UU sources, with the exception of Servetus' Condemnation. As we're closing with another UU who died for his convictions, let me come full circle with another reading from mainline Christianity, this from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Worcester, Massachusetts, responding to Reverend Reeb's death.
Is it heresy to think that a Universalist Unitarian minister is a saint of the church? And to wish and pray deep in our hearts that the American Catholic hierarchy is a true ecumenical spirit? That the American Catholic hierarchy in a true ecumenical spirit would recognize him as such and petition the Holy See for his canonization? We think not. America has needed a model, a symbol of Christian love, such as we have not had before. We have needed a model around which we could build our involvement in the world around us. Now we have him in James Reeb.
That's surely a different response than the established church showed to Servetus. In fact, religious groups of all denominations memorialized Reverend Reeb, and 30,000 attended a memorial rally in Boston. Despite our radical roots and unorthodox theologies, we UUs share with the world's other religions a commitment to the betterment of humanity and the care of the planet. Let's end with our closing song that celebrates the courage to choose what's right. Number 119 in your gray hymnal and on the screen, Once to Every Soul and Nation.
It's the same way with the choir singing the first verse once on their own, and then join in.
Thank you.
Our closing words are from the Reverend Barbara Peskin. They're in our gray hymnal as number 680, although I'll just read them. There you only see her name, but Peskin was retired in 2011 as the senior minister of the UU Church of Evanston, Illinois. She was an LGBTQ activist and an out lesbian, and is the author of many UU writings, including a wonderful The Atheist Prays, which is not what I'm reading today, but is worth looking at. Barbara Peskin writes, "Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of, and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go, remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, to bow to the mystery."